Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. This is a podcast where I read old books, sometimes fiction, sometimes non-fiction, in the most boring way I can, to try and help slow your spinning mind for you to fall asleep in the most natural way possible. The stresses of life often follow us to bed and keep us company, but I'm here to distract you from them and help you drift away. But before you do fall asleep, if you find Sleepy Time Tales helpful and would you like to support me, to help me keep it going out to you and thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider signing up on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. If monthly support is a bit much, you can also put a tip in the tip jar. Both of these are linked in the show notes. Or you can support Sleepy Time Tales by simply spreading the word. If you know someone who's struggling to sleep, just tell them about it. And that's enough of that. Let's get back to what I thought was going to be an apocalyptic story, but is mostly a romantic drama, but it's still quite interesting despite that. So snuggle down, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and listen closely as I lead you down the path to sleep. We return this week to The Last Man by Wollstonecraft Shelley. Raymond staggered forth from this scene as a man might do, who had been just put to the torture, and looked forward to when it would be again inflicted. He had sinned against his own honor by affirming, swearing to, a direct falsehood. True, this he had palmed on a woman, and it might therefore be deemed less base, by others, not by him. For whom had he deceived? His own trusting, devoted, affectionate Perdita, whose generous belief galled him doubly, when he remembered the parade of innocence with which it had been exacted. The mind of Raymond was not so rough cast, nor had been so rudely handled in the circumstance of life, as to make him proof to these considerations. On the contrary, he was all nerve. His spirit was as a pure fire, which fades and shrinks from every contagion of foul atmosphere. But now the contagion had become incorporated with its essence, and the change was the more painful. Truth and falsehood, love and hate lost their eternal boundaries. Heaven rushed in to mingle with hell, while his sensitive mind, turned to a field for such battle, was stung to madness. He heartily despised himself. He was angry with Perdita, and the idea of Evadne was attended by all that was hideous and cruel. His passions, always his masters, acquired fresh strength from the long sleep in which love had cradled them. The clinging weight of destiny bent him down. He was goaded, tortured, fiercely impatient of that worst of miseries, the sense of remorse. This troubled state yielded by degrees to sullen animosity and depression of spirits. His dependents, even his equals, if in his present post he had any, were startled to find anger, derision, and bitterness in one, before distinguishing for suavity and benevolence of manner. He transacted public business with distaste, and hastened from it to the solitude which was at once his bane and relief. He mounted a fiery horse, which had borne him forward to victory in Greece. He fatigued himself with deadening exercise, losing the pangs of a troubled mind in animal sensation. He slowly recovered himself, yet at last, as one might from the effects of poison, he lifted his head from above the vapours of fever and passion into the still atmosphere of calm reflection. He meditated on what was best to be done. He was first struck by the space of time that had elapsed, since madness, rather than any reasonable impulse, had regulated his actions. A month had gone by, and during that time he had not seen Evadne. Her power, which was linked to a few of the enduring emotions of his heart, had greatly decayed. He was no longer her slave, no longer her lover. He would never see her more. and by the completeness of his return deserved the confidence of Perdita. Yet, as he thus determined, fancy conjured up the miserable abode of the Greek girl, an abode which from noble and lofty principle she had refused to exchange for one of greater luxury. He thought of the splendor of her situation and appearance when he first knew her. He thought of her life at Constantinople, attended by every circumstance of oriental magnificence, of her present penury, her daily task of industry, her lorn state, her faded, famine-struck cheek. Compassion swelled his breast. He would see her once again. He would devise some plan for restoring her to society and the enjoyment of her rank. Their separation would then follow as a matter of course. Again he thought how during this long month he had avoided Perdita, flying from her as from the stings of his own conscience. But he was awake now. All this should be remedied, and future devotion erase the memory of this only blot on the serenity of their life. He became cheerful as he thought of this, and soberly and resolutely marked out the line of conduct he would adopt. He remembered that he had promised Perdita to be present this very evening, the 19th of October, anniversary of his election as protector, at a festival given in his honor. Good augury should this festival be of the happiness of future years. First he would look in on Evadne. He would not stay, but he owed her some account, some compensation for his long and unannounced absence. And then to Perdita, to the forgotten world, to the duties of society, the splendor of rank, enjoyment of power. After the scene sketched in the preceding pages, Perdita had contemplated an entire change in the manners and conduct of Raymond. She expected freedom of communication and a return to those habits of affectionate intercourse which had formed the delight of her life. But Raymond did not join her in any of her avocations. He transacted the business of the day apart from her. He went out, she knew not whither. The pain inflicted by this disappointment was tormenting and keen. She looked on it as a deceitful dream, and tried to throw off the consciousness of it. But like the shirt of Nessus, it clung to her very flesh, and ate with sharp agony into her vital principle. She possessed that, though such an assertion may appear a paradox, which belongs to few, a capacity of happiness. Her delicate organization and creative imagination rendered her peculiarly susceptible of pleasurable emotion. The overflowing warmth of her heart, by making love a plant of deep root and stately growth, had attuned her whole soul to the reception of happiness. When she found in Raymond all that could adorn love and satisfy her imagination. But if the sentiment on which the fabric of her existence was founded became commonplace through participation, the endless succession of attentions and graceful actions snapped by transfer, his universe of love wrested from her, happiness must depart, and then be exchanged for its opposite. The same peculiarities of character rendered her sorrows agonies. Her fancy magnified them. Her sensibility made her forever open to their renewed impression. Love envenomed the heart-piercing sting. There was neither submission, patience, nor self-abandonment in her grief. She fought with it, struggled beneath it, and rendered every pang more sharp by resistance. Again and again the idea recurred that he loved another. She did him justice. She believed that he felt a tender affection for her. But give a paltry price to him who in some life-pending lottery has calculated on the possession of tens of thousands, and it will disappoint him more than a blank. The affection and amity of a Raymond might be inestimable, but beyond that affection, embosomed deeper than friendship, was the invisible treasure of love. Take the sum in its completeness, and no arithmetic can calculate its price. Take from it the smallest portion, give it but the name of parts, separate it in degrees and sections, and like the magician's coin, the valueless gold of the mine is turned to vilest substance. There's a meaning in the eye of love, a cadence in its voice, and a radiation in its smile. The talisman whose enchantments one can only possess, its spirit is elemental, its essence single, its divinity a unit. The very heart and soul of Raymond and Perdita had mingled, even as two mountain brooks that join in their descent, and murmuring in sparkling flow over shining pebbles, beside starry flowers. But let one desert its primal course, or be dammed up by choking obstruction, and the other shrink in its altered banks. Perdita was sensible of the failing of the tide that fed her life. Unable to support the slow withering of her hopes, she suddenly formed a plan, resolving to terminate at once the period of misery, and to bring to a happy conclusion the late disastrous events. The anniversary was at hand of the exaltation of Raymond to the office of protector, and it was customary to celebrate this day by a splendid festival. A variety of feelings urged Perdita to shed double magnificence over the scene, yet as she arrayed herself for the evening gala, she wondered herself at the pains she took to render sumptuous the celebration of an event which appeared to her the beginning of her sufferings. Woe befall the day, she thought. Woe, tears and mourning betide the hour that gave Raymond another hope than love, another wish than my devotion, and thrice joyful the moment when he shall be restored to me. God knows I put my trust in his vows, and believe his asserted faith, but for that I would not seek what I am now resolved to attain. Shall 2 years more be thus passed, each day adding to our alienation, each act being another stone piled on the barrier which separates us? No, my Raymond, my only beloved, sole possession of Perdita. This night, this splendid assembly, these sumptuous apartments, and this adornment of your tearful girl are all united to celebrate your abdication. Once for me you relinquished the prospect of a crown. That was in days of early love, when I could only hold out hope, not the assurance of happiness. Now you have the experience of all that I can give, the heart's devotion, taintless love, and unhesitating subjection to you. You must choose between these and your protectorate. This, proud noble, is your last night. Perdita has bestowed on it all of magnificence and dazzling that your heart best loves. But from these gorgeous rooms, from this princely attendance, from power and elevation, you must return with tomorrow's sun to our rural abode. For I would not buy an immortality of joy by the endurance of one more weak sister to the last. Brooding over this plan, resolved when the hour should come to propose and insist upon its accomplishment, secure of his consent, the heart of Perdita was lightened, or rather exalted. Her cheek was flushed by the expectation of struggle, her eyes sparkled with the hope of triumph. Having cast her fate upon a die and feeling secure of winning, she, whom I have named as bearing the stamp of Queen of Nations on her noble brow, now rose superior to humanity, and seemed in calm power to arrest with her finger the wheel of destiny. She had never before looked so supremely lovely. We, the Arcadian shepherds of the tale, had intended to be present at this festivity, but Perdita wrote us to entreat us not to come, or to absent ourselves from Windsor, for she, though she did not reveal her scheme to us, resolved the next morning to return with Raymond to our dear circle, there to renew a course of life in which she found entire felicity. Late in the evening she entered the apartments appropriated to the festival. Raymond had quitted the palace the night before. He had promised to grace the assembly, but he had not yet returned. She still felt sure that he would come at last, and the wider the breach might appear at this crisis, the more secure she was of closing it forever. It was, as I said, the 19th of October. The autumn was far advanced and dreary. The wind howled, The half-bare trees were despoiled of the remainder of their summer ornament. The state of the air which induced the decay of vegetation was hostile to cheerfulness or hope. Raymond had been exalted by the determination he had made, but with the declining day his spirits declined. First he was to visit Evadne, and then hasten to the palace of the Protectorate. As he walked through the wretched streets in the neighborhood of the luckless Greek's abode, his heart smote him for the whole course of his conduct towards her. First, as having entered into any engagement that should permit her to remain in such a state of degradation, and then after a short wild dream, having left her to drear solitude, anxious conjecture, and bitter still, disappointed expectation. What had she done the while? How supported his absence and neglect? Light grew dim in these close streets, and when the well-known door was opened, the staircase was shrouded in perfect night. He groped his way up. He entered the garret and found Evadne stretched speechless, almost lifeless on her wretched bed. He called for the people of the house, but could learn nothing from them, except that they knew nothing. Her story was plain to him, plain and distinct as the remorse and horror that darted their fangs into him. When she found herself forsaken by him, she lost the heart to pursue her usual avocations. Pride forbade every application to him. Famine was welcomed as the kind porter to the gates of death, within whose opening folds she should now, without sin, quickly repose. No creature came near her as her strength failed. If she died, where could there be found on record a murderer, whose cruel act might compare with this? What fiend more wanton in his mischief? What damned soul more worthy of perdition? But he was not reserved for this agony of self-reproach. He sent for medical assistance. The hours passed, spun by suspense into ages. The darkness of the long autumnal night yielded to day, before her life was secure. He had her then removed to a more commodious dwelling, and hovered about her, again and again to assure himself that she was safe. In the midst of his greatest suspense and fear as to the event, he remembered the festival given in his honor by Perdita. In his honor then, when misery and death were affixing indelible disgrace to his name. Honor to him whose crimes deserved a scaffold, this was the worst mockery. Still Perdita would expect him. He wrote a few incoherent words on a scrap of paper, testifying that he was well, and bade the woman of the house take it to the palace, and deliver it into the hands of the wife of the Lord Protector. The woman, who did not know him, contemptuously asked how he thought she should gain admittance, particularly on a festal night, to that lady's presence. Raymond gave her his ring to ensure the respect of the menials. Thus, while Perdita was entertaining her guests and anxiously awaiting the arrival of her lord, his ring was brought to her, and she was told that a poor woman had a note to deliver to her from its wearer. The vanity of the old gossip was raised by her commission, which after all she did not understand, since she had no suspicion, even now, that Evadne's visitor was Lord Raymond. Perdita dreaded a fall from his horse or some similar accident, till the woman's answers woke other fears. From a feeling of cunning blindly exercised, the officious, if not malignant, messenger did not speak of Evadne's illness, but she garrulously gave an account of Raymond's frequent visits, adding to her narration such circumstances as, while they convinced Perdita of its truth, exaggerated the unkindness and perfidy of Raymond. Worst of all, his absence now from the festival, his message wholly unaccounted for, except by the disgraceful hints of the woman, appeared the deadliest insult. Again she looked at the ring. It was a small ruby, almost heart-shaped, which she had herself given him. She looked at the handwriting, which she could not mistake, and repeated to herself the words, "Do not, I charge you, I entreat you, permit your guests to wonder at my absence. the while the old crone going on with her talk filled her ear with a strange medley of truth and falsehood. At length Perdita dismissed her. The poor girl returned to the assembly where her presence had not been missed. She glided into a recess somewhat obscured, and leaning against an ornamental column there placed, tried to recover herself. Her faculties were palsied. She gazed on some flowers that stood near a carved vase. That morning she had erased them. They were rare and lovely plants. Even now, all aghast as she was, she observed the brilliant colors and starry shapes. Divine infoliations of the spirit of beauty, she exclaimed. Ye droop not, neither do ye mourn. The despair that clasps my heart has not spread contagion over you. Why am I not partner of your insensibility, a sharer in your calm? She paused. To my task, she continued mentally, my guests must not perceive the reality, either as it regards him or me. I obey. They shall not, though I die the moment they are gone. They shall behold the antipodes of what is real, for I will appear to live while I am dead. It required all her self-command to suppress the gush of tears self-pity caused at this idea. After many struggles, she succeeded and turned to join the company. All her efforts were now directed to the dissembling of her internal conflict. She had to play the part of a courteous hostess, to attend to all, to shine the focus of enjoyment and grace. She had to do this while in deep woe she sighed for loneliness, and would gladly have exchanged her crowded rooms for dark forest depths, or a drear night-enshadowed heath. But she became gay. She could not keep in the medium, nor be, as was usual with her, placidly content. Everyone remarked her exhilaration of spirits, as all actions appear graceful in the eyes of rank. Her guests surrounded her applaudingly, although there was a sharpness in her laugh and an abruptness in her sallies, which might have betrayed her secret to an attentive observer. She went on, feeling that if she had paused for a moment, the checked waters of misery would have deluged her soul, that her wrecked hopes would raise their wailing voices, and that those who now echoed her mirth and provoked her repartees would have shrunk in fear from her convulsive despair. Her only consolation during the violence which she did herself was to watch the motions of an illuminated clock and internally count the moments which must elapse before she could be alone. At length the rooms began to thin. Mocking her own desires, she rallied her guests on their early departure. One by one they left her. At length she pressed the hand of her last visitor. How cold and damp your hand is, said her friend. You are over-fatigued. Pray hasten to rest. Perdita smiled faintly. Her guest left her. The carriage rolling down the street assured the final departure. Then, as if pursued by an enemy, as if wings had been at her feet, she flew to her own apartment. She dismissed her attendants. She locked the doors. She threw herself wildly on the floor. She bit her lips even to blood to suppress her shrieks, and lay long a prey to the vulture of despair, striving not to think, while multitudinous ideas made a home of her heart, and ideas, horrid as furies, cruel as vipers, and poured with such swift succession that they seemed to jostle and wound each other, while they worked her up to madness. At length she rose, more composed, not less miserable. She stood before a large mirror. She gazed on her reflected image, the light and graceful dress, the jewels that studded her hair and encircled her beauteous arms and neck, her small feet shod in satin, her profuse and glossy tresses, all were to her clouded brow and woe-begone countenance like a gorgeous frame to a dark, tempest-portraying picture. Vase am I, she thought, vase brimful of despair's direst essence. Farewell, Perdita, farewell, poor girl. Never again will you see yourself thus. Luxury and wealth are no longer yours. In the excess of your poverty you may envy the homeless beggar, for truly am I without a home. I live on a barren desert, which wild and interminable brings forth neither fruit nor flower. In the midst is a solitary rock, to which thou, Perdita, art chained, and thou seest the dreary levels stretch far away. She threw open her window, which looked on the palace garden. Light and darkness were struggling together, and the orient was streaked by roseate and golden rays. One star only trembled in the depth of the kindling atmosphere. The morning air, blowing freshly over the dewy plants, rushed into the heated room. All things go on, thought Perdita. All things proceed, decay, and perish. When noontide has passed and the weary day has driven her team to their western stalls, the fires of heaven rise from the east, moving in their accustomed path. They ascend and descend the skyey hill. When their course is fulfilled, the dial begins to cast westward an uncertain shadow. The eyelids of day are opened, and birds and flowers, the startled vegetation, and fresh breeze awaken. The sun at length appears and in majestic procession climbs the capital of heaven. All proceeds, changes, and dies, except the sense of misery in my bursting heart. Aye, all proceeds and changes. What wonder then that love has journeyed on to its setting, that the Lord of my life has changed. We call the supernal lights fixed, yet they wander about yonder plain. And if I look again where I looked an hour ago, the face of the eternal heavens is altered. The silly moon and inconstant planets vary nightly their erratic dance. The sun itself, sovereign of the sky, ever and anon deserts his throne, and leaves his dominion to night and winter. Nature grows old and shakes in her decaying limbs. Creation has become bankrupt. What wonder then that eclipse and death have led to destruction the light of thy life, O Perdita? Chapter 9. Thus sad and disarranged were the thoughts of my poor sister, when she became assured of the infidelity of Raymond. All her virtues and all her defects tended to make the blow incurable. Her affection for me, her brother, for Adrian and Idris, was subject, as it were, to the reigning passion of her heart. Even her maternal tenderness borrowed half its force from the delight she had in tracing Raymond's features and expression in the infant's countenance. She had been reserved and even stern in childhood, but love had softened the asperities of her character, and her union with Raymond had caused her talents and affections to unfold themselves. The one betrayed, and the other lost, she in some degree returned to her ancient disposition. The concentrated pride of her nature, forgotten during her blissful dream, awoke and with its adder's sting pierced her heart. Her humility of spirit augmented the power of the venom. She had been exalted in her own estimation, while distinguished by his love. Of what worth was she, now that he thrust her from this preferment? She had been proud of having won and preserved him, but another had won him from her, and her exultation was as cold as a water-quenched ember. We in our retirement remained long in ignorance of her misfortune. Soon after the festival she had sent for her child, and then she seemed to have forgotten us. Adrian observed a change during a visit that he afterward paid them, but he could not tell its extent or divine the cause. They still appeared in public together and lived under the same roof. Raymond was as usual courteous, though there was, on occasions, an unbidden haughtiness or painful abruptness in his manners, which startled his gentle friend. His brow was not clouded, but disdain sat on his lips, and his voice was harsh. Perdita was all kindness and attention to her lord, but she was silent and beyond words sad. She had grown thin and pale, and her eyes often filled with tears. Sometimes she looked at Raymond as if to say that it should be so. At others her countenance expressed, "I will still do all I can to make you happy." But Adrian read with uncertain aim the character of her face, and might mistake. Clara was always with her, and she seemed most at ease when, in an obscure corner, she could sit holding a child's hand, silent and lonely. Still, Adrian was unable to guess the truth. He entreated them to visit us at Windsor, and they promised to come during the following month. It was May before they arrived. The season had decked the forest trees with leaves, and its paths with 1,000 flowers. We had notice of their intention the day before, and early in the morning Perdita arrived with her daughter. Raymond would follow soon, she said. He had been detained by business. According to Adrian's account, I had expected him to find her sad, but on the contrary, she appeared in the highest spirits. True, she had grown thin. Her eyes were somewhat hollow and her cheeks sunk, though tinged by a bright glow. She was delighted to see us, caressed our children, praised their growth and improvement. Clara also was pleased to meet again her young friend Alfred. All kinds of childish games were entered into, in which Perdita joined. She communicated her gaiety to us, and as we amused ourselves on the castle terrace, it appeared that a happier, less careworn party could not have been assembled. "This is better, Mamma," said Clara, "than being in that dismal London, where you often cry and never laugh as you do now." "Silence, little foolish thing," replied her mother, "and remember that anyone that mentions London is sent to Coventry for an hour." Soon after, Raymond arrived. He did not join as usual in the playful spirit of the rest, but entering into conversation with Adrian and myself, by degrees we succeeded from our companions, and Idris and Perdita only remained with the children. Raymond talked of his new buildings, of his plan for an establishment for the better education of the poor. As usual, Adrian and he entered into argument, and the time slipped away unperceived. We assembled again towards evening, and Perdita insisted on our having recourse to music. She wanted, she said, to give us a specimen of her new accomplishment. For since she had been in London, she had applied herself to music, and sang without much power, but with a great deal of sweetness. We were not permitted by her to select any but light-hearted melodies, and all the operas of Mozart were called into service, which we might choose the most exhilarating of his airs. Among the other transcendent attributes of Mozart's music, it possesses more than any other that of appearing to come from the heart. You enter into the passions expressed by him, and are transported with grief, joy, anger, or confusion, as he, our soul's master, chooses to inspire. For some, the spirit of hilarity was kept up, but at length Perdita receded from the piano, for Raymond had joined in the trio of Taci in Gusto Core and Don Giovanni, whose arch entreaty was softened by him into tenderness, and thrilled her heart with memories of the changed past. It was the same voice, the same tone, the self-same sounds and words, which often before she had received as the homage of love to her. No longer was it that, and this concord of sound with its dissonance of expression penetrated her with regret and despair. Soon after, Idris, who was at the harp, turned to that passionate and sorrowful air in Figaro, Porgi amor qualche risforo, in which the deserted countess laments the change of the faithless Almaviva. The soul of tender sorrow is breathed forth in the strain, and the sweet voice of Idris, sustained by the mournful chords of her instrument, added to the expression of the words. During the pathetic appeal with which it concludes, a stifled sob attracted our attention to Perdita. The cessation of the music recalled her to herself. She hastened out of the hall. I followed her. At first she seemed to wish to shun me, and then, yielding to my earnest questioning, she threw herself on my neck and wept aloud. "Once more," she cried, "once more on your friendly breast, my beloved brother, can the lost Perdita pour forth her sorrows." I had imposed the law of silence on myself, and for months I have kept it. I do wrong in weeping now, and greater wrong in giving words to my grief. I will not speak. Bad enough for you to know that I am miserable. Bad enough for you to know that the painted veil of life is rent, that I sit forever shrouded in darkness and gloom, that grief is my sister, everlasting lamentation my mate. I endeavored to console her. I did not question her. But I caressed her, assured her of my deepest affection and my intense interest in the changes of her fortune. Dear words, she cried, expressions of love come upon my ear, like the remembered sounds of forgotten music that had been dear to me. They are vain, I know, how very vain in their attempt to soothe or comfort me. Dearest Lionel, you cannot guess what I've suffered during these long months. I've read of mourners in ancient days who clothed themselves in sackcloth, scattered dust upon their heads, ate their bread mingled with ashes, and took up their abode on the bleak mountain tops, reproaching heaven and earth aloud with their misfortunes. Why, this is the very luxury of sorrow. Thus one might go from day to day, contriving new extravagances, reveling in the paraphernalia of woe, wedded to all the appurtenances of despair. Alas, I must forever conceal the wretchedness that consumes me. I must weave a veil of dazzling falsehood to hide my grief from vulgar eyes, soothe my brow and paint my lips in deceitful smiles. Even in solitude I dare not think how lost I am, lest I become insane and rave. The tears and agitation of my poor sister had rendered her unfit to return to the circle we had left, so I persuaded her to let me drive her through the park, and during the ride I induced her to confide the tale of her unhappiness to me, fancying that talking of it would lighten the burthen, and certain that, if there were a remedy, it should be found and secured to her. And I think I'm going to leave it there. As always, if you would like to pick up where I'm leaving off, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.